What's up, everyone? Welcome to Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Chelsea Sherrod, and today I'm so happy to be joined by SNY contributors Hannah Kaiser and John Jastremski, who's still recovering from the Knicks' disappointing Game 1 loss in the Eastern Conference Finals. JJ, are you doing all right?
I'm hanging in. It's great to be with both you and Hannah. But yes, I was walking around Brooklyn this morning with the hood over my head. I was trying to avoid any conversation regarding what happened in Madison Square Garden last night. And thankfully, I get to distract myself talking with you ladies with a little Met baseball. I need it because I'm sick of talking about Game 1. I'm over it. I can't.
Yeah, you're not alone. So thankfully, Hannah's here to join us in some Mets talk. Let's start with, guys, some recap of the Mets' last two series. So the Mets have hit their first rough patch of the season, dropping 2 of 3 to the Yankees and the Red Sox. They did avoid a sweep in Boston with a much-needed 5-1 win last night, but that only came after the Mets had lost 3 straight games for the first time all season. So JJ, just overall here, what are your thoughts on the Mets' performance this past week?
It was not a great week for the Mets. Look, there was a lot of hype. There was a lot of anticipation for the Subway Series, and there's an argument to be made. The Mets easily could have gotten swept in that Subway Series. They haven't been swinging the bats great. That's why, to me, finding a way to win against Garrett Crochet, who's clearly one of the premier pitchers in the American League, that's one of those games you bookmark and say, hey, it's one of those stop the bleeding type of moments. The Mets are going to be fine. They're one of the best teams in all of baseball. They're going to win a ton of games, but you're going to go through stretches like this throughout 162 games. It's inevitable. That's just the nature of the beast in Major League Baseball, and it wasn't a great series at Yankee Stadium. They got off to a bad start in Boston. They tweaked the lineup a little bit. But more than anything, this is what I want to address from last night's game, and I have been roasting Brett Baty because he's always profiled as a guy who hits in AAA and doesn't hit in the big leagues. Well, since they have brought Brett Baty back to the big leagues, he has done nothing but rake, to the point where he's getting big hits against high velocity, tough lefty like Crochet. I mean, that's the sort of thing if I'm a Met fan saying, hey, how can I lengthen out my lineup? Baty continuing to hit like this solves a whole lot of problems. It allows you to DH Mark Vientos. It allows you to have some stability at third base. This is a guy who's a top prospect in the sport for a long period of time. I've been roasting him. I was sick and tired of him. Apologies to Brett Baty, but I wanted to say that because that's a big moment for the Mets. Stop the bleeding. Get ready for the Dodgers coming up, which is going to be a lot of fun over the next couple of days. How do you need those stop the bleeding games? Chelsea, you need them. Mets got one on, what was it, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it was.
Yeah. I mean, I think Baty probably heard you roasting him, and now he's making you pay for it, JJ.
Hey, save your receipts. Good. I'm glad.
For sure. Hannah, we continue to see the Mets struggle with runners in scoring position, though. How do they break out of this funk? What do they need to do?
Not too much, because this is the thing. Like, performance with runners in scoring position is inherently fluky. And just to try to make that point, I was looking into it's a lot of the same guys from the lineup last year. Last year, the Mets were second best overall with runners in scoring position offensively. And from the beginning of the season through just before that Yankees series started, the Mets were ninth. That's not amazing, but they were ninth with runners in scoring position batting average. Since then, since the start of the Yankees series, they are last in batting average with runners in scoring position. So listen, I think they need to not try to overcompensate change too much, because what we're seeing is like these are guys who can get big hits at times. They just haven't lately. They're all slowing down at the same time. We mentioned this off the top. They're the first team to lose 3 in a row so far this season. This is just what happens sometimes. Last year, they lost 5 in a row to start the season. They lost 4 of their final 6. That's not what anybody remembers from the 2024 Mets campaign. This is not to say that there hasn't been some really ugly at-bats or some particularly ill-timed slumps from all of their best hitters. But I just think that runners in scoring position is inherently a small sample size. You're not it looks bad because that's when people are paying attention. But when you stretch it out over any length of time, like literally they were not bad with runners in scoring position as much as, or as recently as like a week ago. So I think what they need to do is not try to change too much. I mean, even in the way that Carlos Mendoza has been talking about what they're doing wrong in those big spots, feels like he's saying they're too passive and then he's saying they're too aggressive. And it's like, that can be the problem with trying to adjust too much on the fly to something that is, again, inherently pretty fluky.
Yeah, very true. Let's just talk about this tweet that Steve Cohen posted on X, and I say tweet just because I still call it Twitter. But he posted, welcome to the ups and downs of a baseball season. This too will pass. And so anyone who's played baseball, who's been close to the game, who covers the game like we do, know that yes, this season is very long and we're very familiar with the ebbs and flows of the year. But to no one's surprise, Mets fans are overreacting to the team's struggles. But JJ, do these losses expose some deeper concerns?
So I think it's a combination of the two, Chelsea. Look, I think Steve Cohen is 1,000% right. You play 162 games, I'm sorry, unless you are the 1998 Yankees, you're going to lose 55, 65 of them. And that's if you're a really, really good team. That's just the way the sport is set up. However, this stretch of games, I think it has exposed some of the weakness within the New York Mets, where they have been heavily reliant on specifically Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso, who got off to tremendous starts. Alonso was hitting from day one. Lindor, it took him a couple of weeks, but he was as hot as a firecracker from the middle of April until about the middle of May. And you were waiting for other guys within this lineup to step up, and you haven't necessarily gotten that. So I'm still waiting to see what this Met lineup looks like when it's a well-oiled machine, and that means Juan Soto looking like Juan Soto. That means Mark Vientos putting it together consistently. We haven't seen that yet, and I think that's been exposed in a couple of these games, and they got unbelievable production out of their bullpen for the first month of the year. You've seen some warts with that in a couple of these games. Guys that were really sharp to begin the year haven't been as sharp in a couple of these outings. But look, I'm not hitting any panic button. I know the Mets are going to see a much easier schedule after the Dodgers come to town. And hey, you have this bad week against the Red Sox and the Yankees. We'll see how the Dodgers series plays out. You know what cures that? Seeing the Rockies and seeing the White Sox come to town next week. That's where you can get the batting averages fat. That's where you can lower those ERAs. Those are the sort of games that can have everybody relaxing a little bit in Metland. And Chelsea, think about this for a minute. The Mets last year at this time, it looked like they were in the middle of a lost season. It looked like they were going to fade into the absolute abyss as a baseball team. So I think they can handle, a bad week. It does happen.
No, for sure, JJ. I mean, Hannah, what do you think? Do you think that this exposes some deeper concerns? Are you kind of feeling like JJ, that we all kind of need to relax a bit?
Everything you said, JJ, I was paying super close attention, but I was also using half my brain to try to think about, if we did call it X, what would you call tweets? X's?
Oh boy, good luck with that. Can I solve that riddle after the show, please?
Thank you, Hannah. We'll save that. We'll save that for later.
And I'm like, what would they be if they were X? If it was X, they would be X's. Yeah. I mean, I understand. I actually think that if you are on the team, so this applies to Steve Cohen, the owner, and this applies to Juan Soto, the star player. I think you have to know that the fans are going to be a little emotional, particularly in the wake of the Subway Series loss. And maybe now is not the time to remind them that the season is super long, but the season is, of course, super long. And there is some concern. JJ touched on this. You can't have a team that's reliant on Pete Alonso being a twice as good as league average offensive player in order to win. That's not to say that that was the only reason they were winning before the last week, but that Pete Alonso is just not a Pete Alonso you're going to have for 162 games. And he's coming back to earth, he's coming back to earth and then some. He's kind of going under the earth. So that's concerning. But I do think the longer term concern, right, is like, were they too reliant on Pete's power to get wins? And I also just think that the starting rotation, the way that it was to start, this has not been a problem of late, but we're going to talk about they're going to get some starting pitching back. So I think they'll start to win in different ways, but I do think it won't look like it did for that first month of the season, because you're just not going to have Pete Alonso 200 plus WRC plus guys. So that's the one thing that I'm like, it's not so much, oh, that's cause for concern, he's going to be bad forever, but it is like, he's not going to get back to those heights this season, and they're going to have to figure out a way to win without that.
Yeah, and to that end, speaking of the lineup, to shake things up, manager Carlos Mendoza shuffled the lineup on Wednesday. He slid Juan Soto up to the 3-hole and moved Pete down to the cleanup spot. But Hannah, another rare move by Mendoza was keeping in Brett Batty at third base against a lefty, and it paid off as he drove in 3 runs. Does Batty need to be the Mets' everyday third baseman until Vientos shores up his defense? What do you think?
I think Brett Batty just should be the everyday third baseman. I don't think Vientos' defense is ever going to be better than Brett Baty's. And I think if Brett Baty is hitting, JJ, you touched on this. That gives you some stability at third base. With Winker hurt, they're going to need Vientos to DH. We saw this, was it this clip that when JJ was talking, you saw how excited Baty was when he got to first base after this hit. This is what he needs. This is a guy that we've all talked about, like when he was struggling. Oh, there's probably some mental aspect to these struggles because he's a guy who's been a top prospect. He's been so successful. Look at him being so happy right there. Like, why wouldn't you want to keep him in the game? Ride the hot hand. Let him feel himself a little bit and sort of establish himself at the big league level. Since he came back, he's got a 583 slug. Now, his batting average and his on-base percentage are exactly the same because he hasn't worked a single walk. So maybe you'd like to see him be a little bit more patient at the plate. But no, I think the defense is great. He's made some great defensive plays. And certainly for as long as Winker is out and you have Vientos DHing, you want to keep Brett Baty. I'd keep him as an everyday third baseman. And the other thing is, I've written about this in the past. DH can be a tricky position for guys who are used to playing in the field. So I wouldn't hate them just letting Vientos get used to DHing, learn that kind of routine, even if it is only for as long as Jesse Winker is out. But I know that young players don't always like to DH because it suppresses a little bit of their economic value because so much of WAR factors in defense. But for this stretch, I'd keep Baty at third. I'd let Vientos sort of figure out how to get good at DHing when that's all you're doing.
Yeah, no, it seems like Baty's confidence is way higher and he's in a much better space mentally. JJ, is this version of Baty reminding you at all of the spark that Vientos brought to the team around this time last year?
So interesting, Chelsea. They're in similar situations. Vientos was a guy who was kind of forgotten. Baty wasn't necessarily forgotten, but he wasn't making the most of his opportunities. So I can see where you're going with that parallel. I'm not there yet just because Mark Vientos had so many monstrous hits. And it started with a walk-off, I want to say, against the St. Louis Cardinals Sunday afternoon. And he basically parlayed that the entire 2024 season where it felt like he was in the middle of everything. And when you were sitting there watching the postseason, Mark Vientos was one of, if not the Mets' most productive hitter in a lot of those games. So I think that's a high standard to put on Brett Baty, saying, hey, he's going to be last year's version of Mark Vientos. I think the more important question the Mets have got to figure out, and it's to Hannah's point, how do you have a lineup where Brett Baty and Mark Vientos are both contributing and really helping you lengthen this baby out? And I think for the time being, Brett Baty being at third base and Mark Vientos being the DH is the way to do that. It's tricky for Vientos. Baty, they're giving him more leash. They're giving him more opportunities against left-handed starters. And that's my hope here, Chelsea. Listen, if they can get Vientos and Baty as contributors, as guys they can count on almost on a day in and day out basis, it just makes the look and the feel of this lineup and this team that much better. So I think that's something you really want to see here. Yes, Brett Baty and his emergence, but not losing what Mark Vientos gave you a year ago. Because if you don't have that version of Mark Vientos, your lineup is taking a hit.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, yeah, just like you mentioned, JJ, they just want some more, consistency with their production. But guys, let's get into a little bit of drama that we saw in Boston during Tuesday's game. So Red Sox starter Walker Buehler and manager Alex Cora were ejected after arguing balls and strikes with the home plate umpire. At one point, Francisco Lindor, who was standing on second base, gestured to the ump to throw Buehler out. Buehler was not happy with Lindor and posted on X, "I wouldn't want to face me either." I actually thought that this was hilarious. And I love that Francisco Lindor was trolling in this moment. But Hannah, what's your take on that whole sequence? Was Lindor out of line or was he just having fun with the Red Sox?
Yes, he was having fun. It was fun. It was funny. It was not out of line. I like this Lindor more than, listen, last year when he was hitting all those clutch home runs, he was like scary stoic. I was a little bit like, whoa, I don't know what's going on here. I mean, and that was great. He was hitting all the clutch home runs. But I like this. I like a little fire. I like a little fun. I mean, the way that Buehler responded on social media, keep it general, so I don't have to figure out how to refer to it. I think he was having fun with it too. And Alex Cora has come out today. He said that he and Lindor had breakfast. They laughed it off. I think everybody is feeling completely fine about this. I have no problem with this whatsoever. I like actually when Walker Buehler went to the Red Sox from the Dodgers this offseason, I was sort of like, wow, that really fits for me. And I was specifically thinking about how the Red Sox and the Yankees have a rivalry. And now after the World Series last year, maybe the Dodgers and the Yankees have a little bit of a rivalry. And Buehler is a guy who certainly leans into some of that, like, on-field drama, chemistry type stuff. And sure, if he wants to have that with the Mets too, why not? I think that he is a guy who feeds off of that and also can dish it back. And so I don't mind Lindor sort of knowing his audience and playing along.
Listen, no, this is pure entertainment, and this is exactly what people come to see. Yes, we want to see these guys show their emotion, and I loved that from Lindor because I also love when people troll other people. JJ, are you surprised that Buehler and some Red Sox fans took Lindor's gesture so seriously, or was it just him having fun, like Hannah said?
Well, I do think Lindor was definitely messing around. I'm not surprised in this day and age that the Red Sox fans had an issue with it because their team was put in a rather compromised position because, you know, you're early in a baseball game and all of a sudden you're staring all of these innings in the face. Buehler's supposed to be one of your better starting pitchers and you got to go into the bullpen early on in that game. The biggest problem I had with any of this is the home plate umpire. And I understand Walker Buehler probably used some language that he shouldn't have used. Like, I'll be the first to admit that. I'm not going to say that he was an angel by any means. You got to give the guy a little bit more leeway. Literally, the pitch was right down the middle. I couldn't believe for a minute they ended up calling it a ball and let the guy vent a little bit. And listen, Lindor, he did his job. I mean, you want to get the starting pitcher out of the game. If the home plate umpire is going to be dumb enough to listen to you and you gesture and throw him out, and maybe subconsciously you say, you know what? I think Frankie's onto something there. Hey, that to me is gamesmanship. But I like the idea in a mid-May regular season, you got Lindor and his animations. You got Buehler going on social media. If I were a Red Sox fan, I'd be like, wow, Alex Cohen, Francisco Lindor having lunch the next day or breakfast the next day. That's I know it probably happens all the time, but that's something where it's like, wow, after all that, you guys are getting all chummy. Crazy.
That was the part that stood out to me the most, too. I was like, were they in the team hotel? Like, doesn't Alex Cora live in Boston? I also just want to add one thing, that there was a second part of Buehler's social media post where he used some foul language again, but to sort of credit his bullpen guys. And if I'm Red Sox fans, I'm focusing on that. I'm focusing on the fact that you got to our guy. You got him out of the game. Good job, Lindor, with your gamesmanship. And we still went on to beat you. So, look, everybody should go home happy from this drama. Everyone got to have a little bit of fun with it.
Listen, it's fun. It's good for the game. It's great for the fans. It's entertaining. I hope that moments like this happen for the rest of the season. One thing that I don't love, though, is Juan Soto. His slump continues. He looked lost at the plate against Garrett Crochet, but besides his hitting, we've seen a couple of instances of his lack of hustle over the past week. Carlos Mendoza even had to have a talk with him about getting out of the box quicker. So, Hannah, are you concerned with Soto's overall energy and body language this season? We haven't seen much of his Soto shuffle since joining the Mets.
Okay, I think this is a little bit of a tricky subject to talk about because people like to have very extreme one way or the other takes about Soto right now. I was thinking about this earlier. It feels like everyone has really camped in on either Juan Soto is unhappy to be a Met. This is a bad fit. This whole contract was a bust. Or what are you talking about? Juan Soto is a generational hitter. He's doing just fine. Everybody stop critiquing him. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think the contract is not a bust. I think the fit is fine. I think that he did his homework this offseason. He knew this was his one chance to cash in on a generational start to a career and figure out a place that he felt comfortable. And I'm sure he chose the Mets because he wanted to be here, because he felt comfortable with the team, because he liked what they were building. And it wasn't just about the money. Also, he is getting paid very highly. However, I do think that his performance does lead me to feel like he's not himself. He's not feeling himself. That was a very passive first couple of at-bats. And I know that Crochet is a really, really tough pitcher and that patience, if not passivity, is one of Juan Soto's huge strengths. But he just does look a little bit off. There is some precedent for this. Right now, he's got a 129 WRC+. That's his worst sort of career full season numbers. However, it's like right on par with what they were that first partial season in San Diego. And that also got off to a little bit of a rough start from a media perspective. This is a guy who's having a slump, who's not performing up to his own personal standards, even if they are pretty productive numbers still. He's not performing up to his own personal numbers, and he just is under a huge microscope given the media market and given the contract that he signed. And the market and the contract might be exacerbating some of the criticisms of those slumps, but I also think it might be exacerbating it for Soto himself. We saw in San Diego, he got off to a slow start. It was maybe not a trade that he was expecting, one that he was not excited about. And then he got surly, and that clubhouse got a little, bad vibesy, bad chemistry. So this is not to say like Juan Soto is a bust and the Mets were mistaken to sign him, or the Mets are a bad fit and Juan Soto made a mistake in coming here. But I do think this is a potentially fraught situation because of how much attention there is on it, and figuring out how to navigate through it without the media attention and the criticism becoming something that is making Juan Soto struggle. That feels a little bit dicey right now. I'm sort of like antsy, like gritting my teeth, watching him take every at bat. Like, gosh, I hope he just gets a huge hit here, feels great, everybody's thrilled with him, and we can put this all behind us. Because I do think that the longer the slump goes on, the greater the attention is on it, and the more pressure that puts on him, and the more kind of animosity that creates between Soto and the media, and the more attention there's going to be on, is he happy? And all that attention is probably making him unhappy. So I want him to hit so he can be happy, so everyone can talk about how he's unhappy.
No, yeah, I think there are a lot of different variables at play here, but I think it just also comes down to the fact that there are these really high expectations that we, the media, the fans, the organization, do have on Juan Soto. Mets Hall of Famer Mike Piazza recently commented that playing for the Mets for the first time can be an adjustment for any star. But keep in mind, Soto thrived under New York's spotlight last year with the Yankees. So, JJ, is this just a slow adjustment period to a new team, or do you think something deeper might be going on here? Do you think that pressure is playing a role in Juan Soto's slump right now?
Well, when you go and sign basically an $800 million contract, there's obviously going to be pressure. However, you just nailed it, Chelsea. We all watched Juan Soto a year ago in the walk year, getting traded from the Padres to the Yankees, basically from Jump Street. Look as comfortable as can be, as swagalicious as can be. Just from day one, he was like, I'm that dude. And I think all of us kind of assumed that was the version of Juan Soto you were going to see as a New York Met from opening day against the Houston Astros, in the Subway Series against the Yankees, on and on we go. I thought the Subway Series for him was going to be a coming out party. I thought being back at Yankee Stadium, hearing 50,000 people booing him out of the building, he usually thrives off that sort of atmosphere, and it didn't happen. He went 1 for 10 in the series. He walked a couple of times in the first game against Carlos Rodon, but didn't do a whole lot. So, yeah, I do think there's something going on. I don't think it's necessarily unhappiness. I think that narrative can shift rather quickly once Juan Soto starts looking like Juan Soto. But whether it's the contract, whether it's the change in stadium, whether it's all of the media attention that he had from leaving the Yankees to going to the New York Mets, this, simply put, has not been the guy that Met fans expected to see. And his at-bats against Crochet yesterday were embarrassing. I mean, let's call it like it is. They were embarrassing. For a guy who is a top hitter in the sport to not get the bat off your shoulder and look as overmatched as he did, I mean, those are the sort of at-bats you expect to see from an 8-hitter, from a 9-hitter, not from one of these generational talents and a guy whose profiling is a first-ballot Hall of Famer. Let me say this with Juan Soto. It's a question of when, not if, he's going to hit. We all know he's going to hit. But you want to see big-time, elite, game-changing, difference-making at-bats throughout the course of this year. And from a statistical standpoint, it's hard to imagine he's going to come close to the numbers he had with the New York Yankees. He may have a monster month or two, but I don't think we're going to be sitting there in September and October talking about Juan Soto hitting close to 40 home runs and having the same sort of statistical year. But, gang, if he gets it going, and he hits later in the year, and more importantly, he hits in the postseason, you can change that narrative pretty quickly.
No, for sure. And I think Juan Soto, he comes off as a guy who seems like he just really likes to talk baseball. He likes to talk just the game. And so I think now that there are people or in the media, we are questioning, how are things going for him personally and making this transition to the Mets. Maybe that's something that he's not used to speaking about. And that could also cause some uncomfortability for him. And then now maybe he's overthinking things. The pressure is being applied a little bit more. And unfortunately for him, we're all going to compare his time with the Yankees now to his time with the Mets. That's just inevitable. Okay, turning to the catchers now, though, guys. Francisco Alvarez is still trying to find his rhythm at the plate after coming back from injury, while Luis Torrens has been giving the team quality at-bats out of the bottom of the order. Hannah, do you like the way Carlos Mendoza is splitting the catching duties right now?
So he's got Alvarez is pretty much an everyday catcher and Torrens just filling it. I guess I would skew maybe a slightly more even split, but I know that Torrens is performing really well, and also his caught stealing numbers are fantastic. I think he's got like the best caught stealing numbers in the league. Torrens does, but I still think you don't want to skew. I wouldn't skew more than 50% towards Torrens just because he's hot right now. I think you have to give Alvarez a chance to get that feel back. He's coming off of a hand injury, which can affect your offense. That like small hamate bone in your hand, it can cause your power to suffer a little. And we've certainly seen his slug not bounce back the way that maybe people were hoping it would. But I think the only cure for that is to let him kind of keep playing regularly. So maybe I think he's skewing heavily. Mendoza is towards Alvarez right now, and I would skew a little bit more evenly, but I wouldn't go any further than 50% of the games with Torrens. Listen, you want to get your catchers as much rest as you can early in the season if you think you're a postseason bound team, and they are a postseason bound team still. But I also think you want to get Francisco Alvarez back swinging the bat, feeling good, and that requires regular playing time.
Yeah, JJ, is there an argument, though, to be made that Torrens has earned more playing time?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you're talking to one of the leaders of the Luis Torrens fan club. This goes back to last year when this guy played really well for the Mets out of nowhere. He had a bunch of big hits. Hannah mentioned how good a job he does as far as throwing runners out. And I know Francisco Alvarez is a big-time prospect, and he showed major glimpses of power in his first year. Last year, even when he was slumping in the postseason, all of the Met pitchers made it crystal clear, hey, we love throwing to this guy. We have a comfort level with this guy. I just don't think there's any harm in seeing Torrens play 2 to 3 days a week. Alvarez is your primary catcher, but the way I see it, Chelsea, I think there's a role for both of these guys to go and impact the team. And as long as Torrens continues to hit, I got no problem seeing him 3 days a week.
No, for sure. I mean, I also think that's how we should have introduced you for the show. President of the Luis
I like
Torrens
that. I think
club.
Luis Torrens are like that.
Yeah.
I owe Brett Batty an apology. I'm in on Luis Torrens. Everything comes full circle. Yeah, sure.
We'll add all this to the bio for the next show.
Thanks.
On the pitching side, though, guys, Tyler McGill bounced back from his rough outing against the Yankees with a strong performance in Boston. He went 4 2/3 inning, allowing just 1 run and struck out 10. It did get a little dicey in the 5th inning, though, but he managed to allow just 1 run on the day. Hannah, with Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas both nearing their returns from injury, has McGill done enough to stay in the rotation?
Okay, so first one of them is going to come back, whoever comes back first, and they're going to go to a 6-man rotation. They've done it with a 5-man rotation thus far. That's impressive. A lot of teams these days do a 6-man rotation, especially if you have a Japanese pitcher. So whoever comes back first, Montas, Manaea, first you have a 6-man rotation. If all 7 guys are healthy, to get them both back, I think McGill has done enough he's been I think objectively the worst. They've all been great, but the worst of the 5 starters so far. However, I'd be more concerned about getting Klay Holmes or limiting Klay Holmes' innings. So maybe you move Holmes to the bullpen. He has a lot of experience, obviously, recently coming out of the bullpen, but he's already at 54 innings this year. This is striking to me. The last 3 years, he's thrown 63 innings exactly every year. His career high is 70 innings. So I think if you have all 7 starters healthy, then you have Holmes in the bullpen, a 6-man rotation. Somebody's going to go down at some point, and then you bring Holmes back into the rotation. So I think McGill has done enough to earn a spot, to keep his spot in the rotation, just because I think you have better options to move to the bullpen. Again, it's the theme of this episode. It's a long season. So I think Klay Holmes has been so great for the Mets so far. You don't want him throwing 200 innings in the regular season. That's for a guy whose career high is 70. So if you can get him in the bullpen for a chunk of the season until you need him back in the rotation, I just think that's a win. That's not a knock on anything he's done in the starting rotation. It just makes the most sense to me when I'm looking at all of the options they have.
Yeah, JJ, just following up on what Hannah said, what are your thoughts on Klay Holmes going to the pen? Because like she said, he's been great to start the year. He's kind of made that transition seem pretty seamless.
So Klay Holmes wants to be a starting pitcher. He made that crystal clear to everybody when he was a free agent. And a lot of people looked at him, myself included, saying, really? You have the arsenal to do it? Are you going to have the stamina to do it? So far, he has passed that test with flying colors. But I think this is now another barometer in the, hey, can he handle this type of deal? Because Hannah nailed the amount of innings that he's thrown. I know he was a starter at one point in the minor leagues, but he hasn't done it in a long period of time. So having that six-man rotation, a lot of teams, it's like, oh, do you really want to go to a six-man rotation? Do you want to limit the amount of starts you have from your top guys? Well, with the Mets, Kodai Senga benefits with the six-man rotation. Klay Holmes is going to benefit with a six-man rotation. And you have arms on the way. Manaea was your best pitcher last year. Frankie Montas has plus stuff. We'll see if he can handle pitching in New York once again. And these are good problems to have if you're the Mets. Now, this all sounds good in theory. Oh, who's going to be out? Where is Manaea? Where's Montas going to fit in? Baseball should tell you, things get turned on a dime. Guys get hurt all the time. You can never have enough starting pitching. I'm cool with a six-man rotation. I do think for Tyler McGill, considering he has bullpen experience, number one, and he has been a guy that's kind of wore down as a starting pitcher over his track record, he, to me, looks like and profiles as the odd man out when these two guys come back.
Okay. And just like you said, it's a long season, JJ. So we'll see how the Mets adjust when those guys return. Let's look ahead and look at the standings now. The Mets have slipped behind the Phillies in the NL East. Next up is a 6-game homestand at Citi Field against the Dodgers, as JJ mentioned, and the White Sox. So Hannah, what do the Mets need to show in these upcoming series, especially going up against the defending champion Dodgers?
I mean, this would be a great, we all thought that the Subway Series was going to be Soto's coming out party. This is another big stage. This would be a great weekend for Juan Soto to have a big game. And it's not as unlikely as you think. I know everybody says they're the big bad Dodgers, but they're starting pitching. Where the Mets have a surplus, the Dodgers have a deficit. The Dodgers, all their good starting pitching gotten hurt. I mean, not all, but they have Yamamoto, who's been great, but they are not going to be facing Yamamoto, so they should be okay. The Dodgers got off to an 8-0 start to the season. If you take that incredible start out, their starting pitching has not been that great. They've been 6th worst, their starters, since that 8-0 start to the season. So this is a chance. Like, don't overlook the Dodgers series and then the White Sox series. This is a chance for the Mets bats to get going. And I would especially I would love to see Soto sort of quiet the haters, have a big moment on this big stage they're going to be on Sunday Night Baseball. And then with the White Sox in town, I think you got to go better than 3-3 to feel good about the next week.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully for their sake they do. So a big test in the Dodgers. But JJ, you mentioned this earlier in the show. The Mets have been good at taking advantage of the weaker teams in the league. Can the White Sox series be a get-right series for the Mets offense?
I sure hope so, Chelsea. Listen, the White Sox and then the Rockies should be a get-right series for any team in Major League Baseball, especially a team that fancies itself going deep into the postseason. I think Hannah nailed the Dodgers series coming up this weekend. Dodgers still have all that star power within their lineup. This has been a team that's struggling to get people out. In theory, this should be a nice time for the Met lineup to really go and put together some quality at-bats and have a big-time weekend here. Now, you'll see a much different version of the Dodgers once we hit October, but I almost look at the Dodgers coming to town and I sit there and say to myself, you know what? Maybe the Mets are getting them at a good time here. So I want to see this lineup that had a good performance against Garrett Crochet and had some good at-bats late in the game against the Red Sox bullpen. I want to see them parlay that into a big weekend or a nice homestand.
Yeah, and so Hannah, you said that the Mets should or could go 3-3 in these next two series.
No, I want to see them do better than 3-3.
That's it. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Better than 3-3. Yeah.
Better than 3-3. I think you want to take at least one from the Dodgers. Like we said, they're missing their best pitcher. They're not going to be facing Yamamoto. They're facing Kershaw, Gonsolin, and Landon Knack, I think. So this is not incredible Dodgers starting pitching. This is not, right, to JJ's point, this is not who they'd be facing in the postseason if they were facing the Dodgers. So you got to take at least one from the Dodgers, and you got to take at least 2 from the White Sox. So better than 3-3.
Okay, JJ, what do you think? What's a successful outcome for this 6-game stretch?
Ooh, I'm going to say greedy here. I want to see him take 2 from the Dodgers and sweep the White Sox. It's time for 4. You're never going to complain about a winning homestand, but how about 5-1? Let's get greedy.
Oh, 5-1. I like it. Okay, I'm gonna say 4-2. 4-2.
That's fair.
4-2. A little
I'm
modest.
greedy. What can I tell you? I'm in a greedy mood.
You can be greedy after what the Knicks did to you last night. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us here on Mets Off Day Live. Hannah and JJ, always a pleasure doing this all with you. I hope you all enjoyed the show, and we will see you on the next Mets Off Day.